how do you try to get them to understand this better? And like, what's that response like?
Yeah, so a lot of it is, as you say, typically more the staffers than the members, but it's a lot of education. And so, up to the point prior to when Hamas, invaded Israel, I think that the main conversation was around our friend Gary Gensler at the SEC and about trying to straighten out the issue of like what are security tokens versus what are digital commodities. And it's really just trying to explain it as this is a new marketplace. Yes, it's a threat, and sometimes the banking lobby isn't crazy about it because they feel like we're doing things that banks can't do. So sometimes you have to explain this is new technology. It doesn't necessarily, if we just followed everything that the banks did from before, maybe we wouldn't have the innovation that we're having today. So it's an argument for financial technology innovation, and it's the other part is that if we don't do it here, it's going to happen in other countries. It already is, and so we can fall behind. We risk falling behind in this industry. Whereas with the internet, we didn't say, hey, let's just ban the internet, and then it showed up in other countries. I think
It was
it's
actually the opposite, right? It was actually the opposite. They actually put special protections in for the internet so it could allow it to flourish and grow.
Yeah, and I often make the connection between like what China did with Bitcoin mining, and Bitcoin in general, is they kind of threw it out of the country because it wasn't really something that they could control as a totalitarian state. Didn't really fit with their mindset. We have a different mindset here, and so we need to understand that and make rules that aren't going to infringe upon the way this technology operates. The BSA and AML, it's a long story, but it's complicated, but the easiest way to explain it is, and it goes all the way to Sam Bankman-Fried actually, is Sam Bankman-Fried was pushing this bill over a year ago when FTX was there, and was trying to impose BSA on like DeFi and layer two solutions, and through this bill, and it got a lot of flack, and it ended up blowing up. But as a result of the whole blow up with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, this is an issue that still hasn't been resolved. And the problem is members and staffers are sort of saying, and if you think about it, Mark would be saying to you, hey, we just want a solution. Like, do we have the Bitcoin miners do the checking? Like, how do we do BSA? And the problem with that is they're thinking about BSA the way FinCEN operates today and it's not necessarily completely effective. They want to see all the transactions. And so the question has been, who should be responsible? Should it be the layer two applications that's building on top of a blockchain, or should it be the underlying blockchain, nodes themselves? Should it be the miners? And the one thing I point to recently has been to say, with the new Treasury rule about taxes, if you remember the crypto tax reporting rules that happened a couple of years ago, that the Treasury is now figuring out a law for how the IRS is going to require Coinbase and others to do reporting on our taxes when we do the trading in crypto, is it's making it very clear that nodes and miners aren't part of that. Those individuals that are going to have to record these transactions for FinCEN. It's ultimately on the on-ramps and off-ramps. It's the Coinbase that's going to have to send my 1099 to the IRS to let them know what I'm doing. So I think that there's, when you talk about it from that frame of mind, it's like, well, if they're not responsible because they don't know who the people are to do the tax reporting, why should they be the people responsible to know who's doing the FinCEN type stuff that you're worried about? And so part of the problem is, again, it's the fit for purpose. It's trying to explain this technology and educating them on the technology and making regulations that will fit and work with this versus just breaking things. And right now they're just breaking things because they're not taking time to understand the technology. And the other thing is why we should just apply everything we have from the old world of financial institutions to this like new world that we are excited to be in.
So the angle is more like, hey, the U.S. has benefited from technology and progress, and I would agree. I mean, really, if you look at it's not up for debate. I mean, just look at the S&P 500. It's being held up by the 7 big stocks that are all like tech stocks, right? So if the U.S. didn't have this technology boom over the last 20 years in the U.S., the world, the financial markets would look much different. And so I guess your angle is sort of like, hey, look, we benefit from this technology boom the last 20 years. We don't want to miss this next one. And if you guys continue to be overly regulated and overly aggressive, then what, it could drive it offshore? I mean, that seems to be sort of the angle, more than like a freedom standpoint?
Yeah, more driving offshore. I mean, from the freedom standpoint, that's important too, and that resonates with like really the Republican side of the aisle. And but
Because
it's
freedom is such a right wing thing now.
whether we like it or not, like the people really talking about Bitcoin have been actually Patrick McHenry, who's the acting chair. He actually went around and talked to other congressional members and did podcasts with them about Bitcoin back in 2017. And he was going on CNBC. They carried the message because they saw it as that freedom money. And we just didn't see that on the other side of the aisle. In fact, it's interesting that we're talking about this because that's actually one of the biggest problems that the progressive Democrats and Warren have with Bitcoin, and also the squad and everybody else, is because to them, they understand what Bitcoin's trying to do. It's trying to do freedom money, right? And I've talked to the progressives. I talked to their offices about this too. But what they don't like is they say, well, this is correct. We need to have some kind of money where the government isn't going to get in the way of minorities or all this kind of thing. But it shouldn't come from somebody in Silicon Valley. It shouldn't be a technology like Bitcoin. It should be the Federal Reserve and Jay Powell and the White House and Treasury and Janet Yellen that figures out the solution for our people, not you. And that's where you can't really talk about the freedom money with them, and that's why they're pushing back so hard against crypto. Because in their
But then what's the angle, right? So like I get that push, and that's sort of what the BIS is saying, and that's what even Lagarde at the ECB, which by the way, there's another big piece of news coming out of the ECB as well about Bitcoin and crypto, or I should say CBDCs, but. What the BIS is saying is that it should come from the government. All money, they're saying, comes from the government. And the BIS specifically says that we need the trust of the central banks. But that's actually completely false. So first of all, nobody trusts the central banks. Second of all, we're really only in this like 50-year experiment of fiat money. If you look past 50 years, you see that it had been gold that had been money for 5,000 years, and really it was commodity money. So it was gold, but even further back, it was feathers, rocks, seashells. So it was never government money. It was always a commodity that the market had chosen. So other than this 50-year experiment, that's actually not false. I mean, could you use any history on them or no?
I could. I'll tell you though that even though there's agreement at how exciting this technology is, when you get into monetary policy, you're entering like a whole new world. And the things, when we saw Biden's executive order 2 years ago, right, about digital assets in the U.S., you have to remember at that time, that was the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and the White House basically decided a few things about our space. They decided that we, the government, need to set monetary policy, that we need to regulate the safety and soundness of any financial transactions and financial institutions, as well as protect consumers, and also protect against illicit transactions, or in this case, when terrorists are using the money. And so this sort of falls in that third bucket of where the government feels they have that requirement. So even people that support Bitcoin, Mark, would actually hold back and actually believe that the central bank is who we need to rely on.
Yeah, and ultimately it's that last piece that you said, which is prevent bad people from using it. And so the balance is always like, well, freedom, but bad people. And so then we have to kind of go back to whatever Jefferson or Franklin's quote, that those willing to give up freedom for safety deserve neither, so to speak.